Welcome back to Plannercraft. I'm Natalie, and today we are going to be doing a little bit of work in Affinity Designer, along with looking at different file types that we can create with. So bear with me one moment just while I'm pulling up the feed so I can see comments. Hopefully I'll be able to see everybody's comments today, but if I can't see on YouTube and Twitch, I do apologise, and I'll try my best. So, good morning Tracy, morning Joyce, morning Thea, and bear with me just while I try and get this to stand up. So I hope you are all having a good day and you had a fab weekend. Morning Carol. And you may have taken the opportunity to invest in Affinity Designer. So I wanted to do a very quick glimpse into what it can do. Now I'm not going to be able to cover everything in this little session that we're doing today. But if you do want to find out more, we have done some Affinity Designer courses in the past that you can actually purchase and view. Good morning Catherine. Okay, so we're going to start off by creating a new document. So first of all we're going to go into the file menu and we're going to go new. Okay, now if I move this panel out of the way for a minute, this is your new document window and you can see you've got two buttons here. Presets are basically for when you want to have a canvas size saved and some initial settings. So this is like your blank sheets, so the equivalent of going and getting an A4 piece of paper and just having it blank. You have templates which you can add to. So templates you would use for a document that you're going to repeatedly use. So for example, it might be that you create your own files and you might want to include a watermark, in which case you can set up a template to do that. But if we go back to presets, I have several that I've already set up, including obviously the Scan and Cut active areas. Now the reason I call them the active areas is they are slightly smaller than the dashed line that you will get on your mat in say Canvas, so that you don't end up having things resized. So long as your file stays within that boundary, you're not going to have any issues resizing. And if you want any particulars on what the sizes of those are, don't hesitate to reach out. I can easily screenshot those for you. So I'm going to be working with the millimeters one today, and we can see that over here we have our page width and height and our DPI. Now this is the important one to get right. For the Scan and Cut, your DPI is always 96. So as long as you have that correctly in there, and then when you export you also put 96 DPI in there, then you won't have to scale when you bring your SVG into Canvas or onto the machine for that matter. Okay, so millimeters is our document unit and the orientation is portrait. Now if you want to take a screenshot of this setup, you can do. You're perfectly welcome to. Now colour wise, because we're looking at working with cutters, to start with we're just going to leave that as RGB. Margins we don't need to bother with, and bleed we also don't need to bother with. So bleed goes outside of the canvas area and the margins go inside, but for what we're doing you don't need them. So we're going to create that and it's going to come in with just a blank sheet. Now in our layers palette you can see we've got nothing there yet because we haven't set an artboard, we haven't put an object on the mat, so there's nothing really to play with. So let's start with some basics, and I'm just going to use some shape tools. So over here on the left hand side you can see you've got a set of blue shapes. You can pick any one of those and that's going to be a shape tool. So let's go for star shape, just because I can. Now when we're drawing our shapes, if you press and hold shift as you drag, you're going to keep them in proportion. Okay. And each shape tool has different red dots that you can interact with. So you can see here that the star shape has 3 red dots. And while you've still got that star tool selected, or any other shape tool for that matter, you can interact with those red dots to actually change your design. So for instance, this right hand dot here, we can see it when you hover over it, you get like a pale red line that's going diagonally through that point. And that controls your inner radius. So if we take it down small, you can have a really narrow pointy star, or we can go for something a little fatter. Where you have a green line that shows, that's saying that that is a right angle in that top point, and it's going to snap to that. So there are lots of snapping points that you'll find. So where we go to that middle point, it's doing a nice proportionate star. And we can also, if the snapping is annoying you and you're not getting where you want to go, if you press and hold Alt, it's going to turn off snapping temporarily while that's pressed, so that you can get it where you want it to go. Okay, on this other side we have the opportunity to round it, like so. And finally we have our red dot at the top, which is going to work on the rounding for that. So we can do a really funky little star that suddenly becomes more like a flower shape. And all those points are also editable up here. Okay, so don't think, oh, I can't get it quite right here, that's it, I'm going to go, no, it's not right. No, just come up here and you can actually type in your figures so that you can be a bit more accurate. Okay, so let's put a few shapes on the mat. And I'm not going to be too fussy about what I'm putting on, because I want to be able to show you a few different things. Okay, so with your shapes on the mat, let's change a few things about it. Now, if you want to choose a colour, for instance, we can go to Swatches and we can choose a swatch set. So you have greys, colours, gradients, and these two here I don't tend to use at all. You then have what are known as your system colours, and then you have your colour books. So those of you that are more familiar with design and print will recognise Pantone as being the source to go, especially if you're here in the UK, for your colour referencing. But for now, because we're just going to be handling cut files, we can just go red. Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into doing lots of fill techniques today. I just want to be able to just show you a few different things like layers. So let's put some different colours in. So when you first start playing with Affinity, best thing to do is either to import a beginner's file. So if you are in the design of Vector group, there's a beginner's file in there. Or we can actually just draw those shapes onto the mat so that we have something to play with, so you can see what the shortcuts are doing. So let's select this shape here. And let's say, okay, I don't really want that at the front. That's going to be my background piece that I'm going to arrange the other shapes onto. Okay, in which case we can send it to the back, like so. Okay, so you've got your Command and Shift that's going to bring it one at a time through the layers. Or we can go and jump. Okay, so we want to resize that. Now you have different options, and this is one of the things I go through in the Design with Vectors book, is these handles each do something different. So for instance, if we were to drag this one at the middle bottom here, that's going to just stretch it in one direction. If we drag this one here, it's going to stretch it in this direction. But the corners are going to do 2 dimensions at once. Now, if you want to keep them in proportion, you can just press and hold shift, and that's going to keep that proportion for you. Okay. Now, at the top of your shape, you have this random dot up here, and if you hover over the top, you're going to see that it goes through a little curved arrow. And that means that we can rotate the shape. Okay. Now, if we press and hold shift at the same time, that's actually going to make that point snap. Now, that's a really useful function for when you get to doing symbols and you want to create frames. So it's a really good one to remember. Okay. And also, while we're here, if I can get it to do it, if you hover on the little line that goes between the two, you're going to get 2 arrows, one pointing to your right, one pointing to your left. And if we click and hold, we can drag so that we actually skew that shape. Now go in that direction. And let's just pop that back to 0. There we go. Now, if we hover to the side of this dot, so not over the top, but to the side, you'll see that you get the up and down, and we can do the same with that. Now, that's useful for if you want to create the effect of text curving, because you don't have a warp tool in Designer, unlike Illustrator or even Affinity Photo. So again, if you're finding your snapping is annoying and you can't reset it, just press and hold that Alt. It's going to enable you to just get that onto the 0. So, okay. And you can do those same interactions with any shape. So if you want to warp your little star shape, you can do. Now, we've done a lovely time of, interacting with the shape controls for this, so where you've got these little red dots. But let's say you're happy with that and now you want to start working with those points individually. What do? We need to go to convert to curves. Now, we get into the node tool. So, the top arrow is our move arrow. So that will give you all your basic interactions. So your basic resize, your rotation, your skew. When you start to get a bit more involved with what you want to do, you're going to want the node tool, which is this little white arrow underneath. And that means that we can start to actually interact with the individual points. So think of nodes as a change of direction for your blade. So each one of these is going to say which angle it's going to go on, how long for, and is it going to be curved or straight, basically. So if I click on a curve node, you can see that they're made up of 2 handles, and let's zoom in a bit so you can see that. So down here we have a magnifying glass. If we click on that, or if we press Z, we can actually click and drag inwards so that we can see a shape better. So I'm going to go back to that node tool, and you can see there's our point that we selected, and the one handle is longer than the other, and that's partially down to distance and partially down to the amount of curve. So the amount of curve between there and there is not as much as what it's going to be around here. So there are 2 points that affect where that curve goes. So we've got this handle here that we've got selected at the moment, and we can waggle that, and that's going to inform this first part of the curve here up to about there. Now, if we click on this dot instead, we've got another handle here, and that's going to do kind of the exit part of the curve, if you just consider that little bit of a curve there. So we can shorten it, and it's not going to go as far, so you're going to not see as much curve. If we put it back where it was, it's going to have a rounded curve, and likewise we can go mad and we can extend it over here, and it's going to look like it's getting a bit of a almost a bit of a windlock that. So we'll pop that back from there. So that's how we can start to play with curves, but let's say that node itself is in the wrong place. We can just click and drag that centre point and take it where we want to. So let's say we want to start playing with this a little, and it might be that we're doing some little flowers that we can form, foam or foam earrings, something like that. We can actually drag those nodes like so. Okay, so we have the start of a flower. So let's say, okay, we're going to take our little oval here and I'm going to resize that and put that as my little flower centre. So that's not using shift, that's just literally using those handles to just get that where I want it to. Now if I move this over the top, you can see that there's a green line, and that's aligning that shape. And if we zoom out so you can see it a bit better, that green line's extending to the edge of the shape, so it's saying that when those two lines cross like that, you know it's dead centre, even though it may not necessarily look like it on the centre section here. So this is where things can start to look a little bit weird, because this height here is taller than this section here. But that's perfectly normal. In a flower we've got 5 points. So let's just nudge that there. So far so good. So let's take that over here. Now if you wanted to cut that out so it would layer up, obviously you cut each of those out of a different coloured card, but sometimes you might want to apply that into a background, and you can do that using a little bit of a trick. So I'm going to group these two so that we've got the two parts of our flower together, and we can actually drop that in for a crop. But if we do it so that it forms a line underneath, it's actually going to put our flower into our shape. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. When you get the blue vertical line, you're going to crop that shape that you're putting your shape onto. When you've got the blue line underneath, you're actually using that original shape as a frame, and it's going to drop in that way. Okay, so when you're getting started, that is probably pretty much all you're going to do. You're going to be moving, maybe making a few tweaks, but let's start getting a bit more exciting, shall we? So let's blow our circle back up again, and let's say, what if you wanted to start getting a bit more complex in terms of your shapes? So when we have two or more selected, we have things called geometry that come into play. So up in this top bar up here, you'll see these 5 buttons. Now the first two should be really obvious. So the little plus is going to add the two together to make one shape, and the subtract is going to subtract the top one from the bottom one to make one shape. Nice and simple. Okay. Then as we start to move across, it's going to get a little bit more complicated. So this one here, where the objects intersect or overlap, you're going to just have that area that overlaps. So that's really useful for where you want to create windows and things. Let's undo that. Then this one, the XOR, takes that opposite path. So basically is anything that overlaps, it's going to remove so that it's a hole, like so. So if you want to create the kind of cut file where you've got decorative edge but then it cuts into the card, that might be a good way of going about doing it. It does depend on the individual design. Undo that. And finally we have divide. So if you have something where you've welded it, particularly text, and you've lost the centre, usually what you can do is you can go divide, and that's going to split it up into the sum of its parts, and then you can use subtract, and that punches the holes back through. But in this case, what that's actually done is it acts like a cookie cutter. So if I separate this out, you can see what you get. So you have the original background shape, the shape that where the overlap occurred, and then the foreground shape. Okay. So if you'd like me to go over anything in more depth, don't be afraid to say, slow down, or what does that do? Okay, so let's pick all these shapes on our mat. So you can click and drag over the top, or you can go Command and A or Control and A. Gotta love the subtitles sometimes on Facebook, so it's a bit of a random one. Okay, so with those selected, we have our align tools. So depending on your setup, you should have something that looks like this, where you've got two rectangles lining up to a left hand edge. And if we click on that, it's going to open up with lots of options. First of all, don't be daunted. They're not as difficult as they look. So let's start with align horizontally. So this one here is going to be align left. So same as if you're aligning all your text to the left, it's going to put the left hand edge of everything into one line, like so. Okay. Likewise, if we go centre, it's going to put all those centres into one line. And finally, the right is going to all go to the right hand edge. Now, the really useful button is this one. And this is where we can start to set the distance between shapes. So, where we've got this box ticked, which is auto distribute, it's going to fit those shapes within that outer edge of your current selection. Okay, so this is useful if you've done like 4 shapes, for instance, that you want to have in a column. And you can use your distribute and it's going to sort out that space for you. But we can also work the other way around. So if we untick auto distribute, we can say how much space we want between each one. So 0 is really useful where you want to do welding and you want to make sure that shapes actually join up to one another. Okay, and when you want to do that, you just press apply. Or we can set an amount, so let's say 5. So that's going to put 5 mil between each shape. But it's not affecting this vertical alignment, it is only looking at that horizontal. So then, if we move down to the vertical, we can put them all up to the top. Now you'll see here, rather than having selection bounds chosen, it's got spread. So it's put those top lines all to the top of your page. And if we click on there, you can see that we've got different options. So if we just set a margin, you can use your margin. First selected means the first shape that you highlighted, and it's going to go to where that was, and it's going to line it up along that line. You can use last selected, and it's going to go to that one. Okay, and selection bounds will put it back where it was originally. Until you click apply, it's always going to have that original selection. So don't think, oh, it's going to be no good, it's going to be lost. Now, again, auto distribute is turned on, so it's going to automatically try and put those in some semblance of spacing. But again, you can put those into 0, and then we can start to see the order that it had things selected in. So even though logically to our eyes we're going, okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, suddenly you can see actually, no, the computer went, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. If I cancel that, we can get back. But those are really useful for when you're doing card blanks. If you are doing anything that has a grid, if you want to create frames where you want to make sure that a pattern is actually lining up correctly, and also having the right amount of space between. So it's a really good skill to practice with, and you don't have to have a lot of shapes on your mat to kind of play with that. You need 3 or more really. Okay, so this is kind of a whistle stop tour of Affinity. So I would be remiss if I didn't at least show you some of the other things that you can do. So let's start with a shape. And I'm going to convert it to curves so that we have our nodes. So if I click on the node tool, you can see that you've got these 4 points. Now as long as you have those, you can use the corner rounder. So when we're creating for the scan and cut, the silhouette, cricket, if you leave your points pointy, then if you do accidentally set it with too much pressure, you can find that your corners will snag. Now, you can kind of build in a little bit of tolerance to help you out here. And the corner rounder does exactly that. So with that selected, you can see we've still got our 4 nodes. Now, I'm going to do Command and A or Control and A on a PC, and that's going to turn them all blue. That means that they're all selected. We click and drag on one, and we're going to drag in towards the shape. So you can see that you're getting a nice rounded corner. Now, because we just want to take the bare minimum of a corner, where you can see that you've got a little rounded circle in that top corner, just let go. And you've added on a really slight rounded corner. It's going to help give your cut pieces a nice polish. So rather than getting kind of a pointy, sticky uppy edge, you've got a nice rounded corner. And you really have got to wonder at subtitles. Okay. So, what else does that mean? Let's take another rectangle. We're going to convert it to curves. We're going to go to our corner rounder. Now obviously we wouldn't necessarily always have to have all of our nodes selected. So we can work on 2 at a time, for instance. So if we click and drag over the top so that we highlight those, we can go, okay, let's create a tab, like so. Now, so long as you always click on vague appearance, your scan and cut or your cricket is going to be happy. So same with this one, make sure you always click on vague appearance. It's going to turn your little corners to these little nodes, and it will be happy. Now, if you don't do that vague appearance step, you can sometimes find that your cutter will totally ignore what you've done, and it will still cut a straight corner. So it's really important that you remember to do that. So any questions so far? Don't be afraid to ask. Okay. Now, fairly new to Affinity Designer is the contour tool, and this is how we do an offset. Now, when you first open Affinity, it doesn't have a shortcut, but you can actually set one up. So I advise you using the letter O for a shortcut, just because it makes it nice and easy to remember that, because it's the offset. Now, when we do it in Affinity, unlike most other programs, you're doing it on the original. So if you want to keep that original shape as a copy, make sure you do a duplicate first, and you're going to be able to edit it to how you want it. So if you want to go out, if you want to go in, you can change your contour type up here so that when we're taking it outwards, you've got round corner, you can take that square, so you're still keeping that square corner on the two corners that we didn't round. Or we can go mitre, which is where it's going to take it basically a 45-degree angle off. Now I'm sure you can already see a use for this option with the mitre, because if you are doing a lovely book cover and you want to cut a piece of paper to go around the outside of your panels, you can use that mitre option to actually create that so that it's ready for cutting and folding around your book cover. You can also say how much of a mitre you have. So if you're working on something that's bigger, then you can actually resize that and you can actually edit how much that goes in. Okay, so that's a little bit offset, and again, when you're happy, you can go bake appearance, and you will then go to your node tool and see that we've got these extra nodes around here. So as long as you can see your nodes, then you know it's been set correctly. So it's always a good idea to just go back and just check that. Now that's all well and good when you're having a first initial play and a practice, but we want to get a little bit cleverer. So let's use the text tool. Now if we click and hold on the text tool, it gives you two options: artistic text and frame text. Artistic text is when you want just one line of text, and it might be that you want to put that onto a path, it might be that you want to play in terms of the text size and things like that, so that you're making it a bit more fancy. So things like scrapbooking titles, sentiments for cards as in the front of a card, whereas the frame text tool is where you have multiple lines of text. So that would be the verse and the insert, for instance, or if you are setting a poem for a feature on a card, then you would use your frame text. But for the most part in design, you'll end up using the artistic text tool. So once you have your tool activated, you can click anywhere on your canvas, and it's going to come up with a little two dots. And if you zoomed in enough, it'll come up with a little cursor, and you can type whatever it is you want to do. So let's go the boring do Christmas. Okay, and we can still resize that, so we've got nice and big. And if we come into this top bar, we can actually change the font. So this works with fonts that are installed in your computer. Anything that is installed you can use. If it's not shown in the list, it probably means that you haven't installed it quite right. So let's go for a scripty one. Okay. So next box is usually where you would find the weight of your font. So if you're using something like Arial, you'll find that when you click that, you'll have lots of different options like light, book, bold, regular, medium, black, etc. Then you have your point size. So typically for an insert you would be looking at 12 to 14 point, unless you're sending it to either a young child, in which case you will go bigger and keep to a plainer font, or if you are sending it to an elderly person, you will definitely want to go a little bit bigger. Then as you move up into your titles, you're going to get sort of around the 36 upwards mark. So especially when we are wanting to cut, you're going to want to go bigger and bolder will cut better. Okay. With your bold and your italics options, it will vary by font. It doesn't do a faux bold or faux italic. Okay, you can fake it with your skew for your italic, and if you want to do bold, you can put a stronger outline on it then expand that outline and weld it back to the original. You can add an underline if you wish, but there's not very many times that you would ever use that. You have the option of setting up character and paragraph styles if you are doing something where you use it frequently. So if you're creating a range of craft products, then you would use your styles. But at this stage, unlikely. Get used to using the software first. Then we have our text align tools, so left, middle, right and justified. Then you have bullets and number bullets. Then you have these options here that just relate to how they view, but you don't have to worry about those. Okay, so far so good. So with our text, yep, that's brilliant. We've got text in. If we were to send that to our cutter as is, you're not going to get a thing out of it because at this point it's still text. So if I want to go back in here and double click, I can highlight that C and go, well actually I need that to be an uppercase C if the font has one, which it doesn't in this case, which is weird. So let's go for one that does. And we can still change font. There we go. So this is Ballerina script. Now if you see a font on my machine that you like, the chances are it either came from Creative Fabrica, Design Bundles or Adobe Font. So just reach out and ask and I can try and check for you. So this one's nice and bold. There's a few little issues, but we're not going, well, we can sort it in text, but I think it would be much easier to do it when it's passed. So this is how we make text suitable for cutters. If we go to layer and convert to curves, it's going to put it into a group, but it's got each letter individual. So we can actually go, okay, that A and that S needs to move over because of this stick at the end just here. And we can actually nudge that over. So what I did there was just use the arrow keys on the keyboard where we want to make sure that things are staying along that same baseline. If you want to tweak that baseline, you can do. And I think everything else is alright. Let's just take that capital C, because I'm thinking it needs to be just a little bit bigger. And we can take that corner, we can stretch this way, we can stretch it that way, or we can just press and hold shift so that it keeps it in proportion. Okay. Now, if we right click on it, we want to ungroup. And the reason that we ungroup is so that we can weld that into one shape. And back to geometry again, so up in this top section here, it's going to weld that and it's going to go into one shape. Nice and easy. And the other thing I would suggest doing, or getting used to doing, is if you just reverse it out so that you've got a black outline and no fill, you can tend to see if there are any issues with the actual outline. So again, just going to zoom in a little bit. So for instance, you might not like that little bump in that H there. It's part of the font, but there's no reason to say that you can't tweak that so it's a little bit more to your liking. So let's just take that out. Just one that square. And we can adjust these handles. And we have a nice curve back. So same, you might do the S there. Now your corner rounder will also work with all your text. So if there's a point where you think, actually I just want to smooth that out a bit, we can just do that just by dragging it, and you can bake the appearance and it's going to soften up line. So if all you want to do is one point like that, that's absolutely fine too. So likewise in here, this one could be a bit awkward. Again, pull that back. Now if it won't pull too far, that probably means that there's another node that it's kind of interacting with. So if we go Make Appearance, usually you'll find that it's done it a little bit and that's more than enough, like so. Now this point here, because that little loop is what's going to be removed, we don't have to worry about. But anything where you are going to be cutting into a shape, then you can actually just fix that. Okay, so far so good. So we've kind of done a little bit on text, we've done a little bit on working with shapes. What about if you want to just work with something that's already designed, that's going to kind of give you a bit of a head start? Where could you possibly go wrong? So let's delete that out. I'm going to zoom back out again. So that's Command and minus if you want to do the little shortcut. And you may think that when you want to work with an SVG, you've got to import it, and the first thing you're going to do is going to go in File and you're going to go Place, and let's use an SVG. Okay, and it's going to come up with this little arrow with a downwards arrow to say where would you want it placed. Now at this point you have a couple options. You can click and drag so that you can dictate the size, or if you just click once, it's going to put it in at the size it was created at. Now that's all well and good and brilliant, yep, it's in there and it looks like it's a path, but it's not. So what it's actually done is brought that SVG in as an image as if you're going to print it, which for designers' purposes typically is correct. You know, it thinks that you are going to be printing this artwork, or you might be exporting it to put it on a website. It's not thinking, oh, I'm going to be going to a cutter. So it's not doing anything wrong, but it's not working right for you. So what you need to do instead is, if we delete that, you're going to open that SVG file. So that's Command and O or Control and O. And it's going to come in like this, where you've got a blank background and you've got your paths. And if we drop that down, you can see that we have one that says curves, and that is the one you want to copy. So at this point we can go Command and C or Control and C to copy it. We can go back to our original document, so this is the one set up for our cutter, and we can paste in, and now it says that magic word here, curves. So as long as it says curves, you know that your machine will be happy to cut it. Now, if you wanted to, with this, instead of necessarily cutting it, you might want to draw it because you've got a lot of fine detail. So this is where you want to start considering how you are using your designs. So if you are cutting this from vinyl, yep, you'll be absolutely fine, there's no need to change anything. If you're working from card, you might want to do a little bit of corner rounding and perfecting, but for best results I would go to a draw, so you're not having to change too much, but you can actually set it up to fill. So let's put a colour in it. And typically what I do when I'm setting up files is, if it's a draw object, I'm going to colour it blue. And that's because when you go to your scan and cut, any draw lines will show up as blue on there. So it makes sense to keep that link going, so that if you look at something you think that's blue, I'm going to make sure that's set to draw, and then you can go from there. So obviously with our machines we can change what fill pattern we put in, but that isn't done at this level. So just think, that's filled, it's going to fill when it gets to canvas. Okay, so that's one way that we can use a file. And if you want to cut it out, we can add a circle. So shift, click, drag for a circle, and we can take that colour out. So over here we have our stroke panel, and at the moment it's got this little black circle with a red line through it. That's saying that there is no stroke. Now, even though it's got no stroke, it would still cut kind of on your scanner gut, but let's make it obvious and give it a nice solid line. Okay. Now, if we move it, you can see straight away it's given us our two lines over the top, and that's going to say it's centered. If you want to do it the other way with the line tools, you can do. So, nice and simple. And we can take some text. Let's go for have a. Make that a little bit bigger. And let's choose a different font. So let's go for that one. Chocolate sprinkle. I'm just going to use that skew tool so that I can actually have that kind of following that same angle, but without rotating the text. So if we were to use rotate instead, all of our verticals would go off vertical, whereas using skew, you're keeping those verticals vertical. And it might be that you want to draw it in a different colour. So at this point we can set that to red. Okay. So I'm just going to use Alt just so I can get that exactly parallel with our line. When you're happy, you can convert that to curves. And again, it's going to put that into a group. Now, the have a, you may find better if you actually weld it, just because it is a font that's going to fill. And if you were to keep those letters individual, where those overlap, you could potentially have your pen going over twice. So if you are using something like a felt tip pen, you could potentially cause your paper to pill a little bit. So just having those little thoughts of, okay, I know that that looks right, but it may not work right when it draws. So again, we can ungroup and weld. Now, Affinity is quite unusual in its ability to actually put non-overlapping paths into one shape. So that's what we call a compound shape, which is really, really useful. Even Illustrator doesn't always work like that. So it's one of the things I do love about Affinity, that you can do that and go, that's the little package. So let's put Merry. And you don't have to go for the same font, we could go for something that's a bit more intricate. Because I'm going to go a bit bigger. I don't need the eyeballs. You can tell I got some. There we go. Let's go for this one. So this one's one of my fonts. Let's take it down a bit. We can go, okay, let's get that angle right. Down a little bit more. Like so. And if you, again, you're finding that that snapping is just being just a little bit annoying, then don't be afraid to just press and hold that Alt. Okay. And again, we'll convert that to curves. Right click, ungroup, and weld together. Now something where you've got lots of busy detail like this, you probably don't need to fill. So if we reverse that round so that you've got no fill and a stroke, then you're probably going to get a better result, like so. Okay, now let's go for Have a Merry Christmas. Now you can use single line font as well. So let's go for Scripty. Just because I know it's a single line because I did it. There we go. Let's get the version T. There we go. And even though it's a single line font, we can still do that same process of skewing it, resizing it. There we go. And I'm just going to nudge it down very slightly. So there we have our single line text. And again, we can convert that to curves. Now with this, I'm going to leave it as a group. Because it's not going to fill, it really doesn't need to weld. And probably wouldn't do successfully anyway. So with your single line text, it's always going to look like it's really thin and not noticeable. But what you have to bear in mind is the actual width of that is dictated by the pen that you use. So if you use a broader pen, your single line text is going to have a really bold, thick look. If you go for something like a metal tip fine liner, then you're going to get that nice thin look. And the smaller that you have that text, the finer the pen you are going to want that to be. Okay. So, I'm just going to do a save as. And let's stick that on my desktop. And we'll give it a name of Christmas sign. Let's go for that. Now when we save, we're saving it in Affinity's native format, which is great for when we want to come back and edit things, but not so good for your cutter because there's no way of getting that to your cutter successfully. So what we have to do is we have to do an export. So if we go to File, Export, and then we're going to go to SVG. So you can see straight away I have a preset called Scan and Cut. It's got that DPI of 96, and we've got Export Text as Curves for font independence. So what that means is if we accidentally forgot to do our Convert to Curves, that's going to save us. So it's a good idea to have that ticked. So I'm going to go into More, so you can see this preset a little bit better. So straight away we can see that I've named my preset Scan and Cut, but it might be that you're creating a new one. You're going to make sure that that says SVG still. It really should do, but just in case anything is changed. Rasterize nothing. That's really important. So rasterizing is where it will take a path, and instead of keeping it as a path, it's going to turn it into dots, and that is really, really a no-no. So make sure that nothing is turned on. It tends to be more so if you've accidentally left an effect on, such as a drop shadow, which you can do in Affinity, so I'll show that in a moment. Then you're going to want to make sure that you have Use DPI selected, and it still says 96. Now the Allow JPEG compression, because we say nothing up here, actually makes no difference. So don't worry about it. It's standard that it's ticked, so just leave it ticked and ignore it. Export text as curves, as I've already said, that saves you that little potential hiccup. Longer text spans doesn't need to be ticked. Use relative coordinates do tick. Now, The rest of them are pretty non-applicable, except maybe with the flatten transforms, but don't worry about that. Now when you first set up your SVG, the one it will have ticked is Set View Box. Now this is really important that you untick it, because if you leave that ticked, when you import that SVG into Canvas, it can potentially resize it. So just make sure that it's unticked and you'll be well away. Add line breaks is mainly for if you're going to get involved into the coding of the SVG, which is where you actually see the file broken down into text. So leave those line breaks in, just in case you end up sending that file to somebody saying, it's corrupted, help, what's gone wrong? And if we go to manage presets, if you change something, you will have create preset as an option, so click that and then you can name that scanning cut. So again, if you want to take a screenshot at this point, that's absolutely fine. You can use these settings. Okay, I'm going to close that and we're going to go export it. And again, it's going to go back to the last place that it exported to. So if we just go into our desktop, and we can save that as Christmas sign. So that's one type of file that we can work with. With that saved, I'm going to close that for now. Let's start a new one. And let's go to inches. So if you want to have the active area in inches, there it is. So you can screenshot that one too. And again, no margins, no bleed. And the colour format is RGB. I'm going to create that. And let's take this file again, just because I want something to go on the mat. And I'm going to give it a colour. Okay. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. And that's because I want to show you what effects can do. So just here we have a little FX button at the bottom of your layered palette. So if we click on that, it's going to come up with a little pop-up, and we have some different options. So top of the list, and let's work our way down, is Gaussian Blur. And if we turn that on, so when you tick something it's going to turn it on, it's going to look like nothing has changed. But what we can actually do is we can actually turn that up. Now everything that I'm doing at this point is an appearance, so it will print lovely as you see it on screen, but when it comes to actually sending that to your machine, it's going to cause issues. Okay, so everything I'm going to do in here is only for print and cut. Okay, so that's Gaussian Blur. I'm going to turn that back off, and we'll go to outer shadow. So you can see that it's going to use black, it's at 100% opacity, and then we have these settings that are all at 0. So we can actually increase the amount of radius so that you can see how much that shadow is going to expand from that line. Offset is how much is going to follow that angle here to remove it from that file, which is good for making things look like they're floating. We have intensity, it's going to make that shadow stronger or paler, and the angle is going to change where that light source comes from. So again, it's a good one for print and cut because you can start to mimic effects. So you've got that kind of shadow going on, and you might want to go, okay, that's going to be a sticker, and then we'll do an offset around it to actually create the cut line. Yep, that's fine. But for when you're actually sending the file to your machine, you want to hide all your effects. Okay, inner shadow, as you might guess, is like outer shadow, but it's going to go inside. So I'll make that really strong. So you can see that you've got like a darker tinting, and again, it's another good one for print and cut. You can kind of have that mimic effect of a die cut where you've actually gone round with your inking around the outside, and it does give a nice soft effect. We can offset it so that you get more of the colour to one edge. We can make it more intense so that you get more like you've done it with a lino cut, which also looks really funky. And we can change where that angle goes to. Again, turn off. Outer glow. So this is kind of the opposite to outer shadow, in that if you've got something underneath it, you're going to be creating a glow effect onto that background. Okay. And inner glow's literally the opposite. Outline. So, to be honest, outline you're unlikely to use because you've got that stroke feature. 3D is if you want to create like a sort of roundedness to it, then you've got your bevel and emboss that's going to work both inside and outside. So 3D is only going to work on the actual shape itself, and that's the difference. So if you look at bevel and emboss, you can see that there's an outer shadow as well as the inner glow and the inner shadow, and it just makes it a little bit easier than trying to balance these four. Colour overlay is if you want to apply a colour over the top, and gradient overlay does a gradient. Okay. And you also have the ability to tweak things. So this is going to start to apply more so if you are importing images, if you are working with multicolour files that you don't want to cut the colours individually, then you can use these, but that's for another day. So let's delete that, and let's go back to open, and I'm going to go back to my downloads. So when we're looking at files, there's lots of different files that we can look at. You have fonts that you'll install and then use through text. You will have SVGs that will cut, like the design I just showed you, and then some SVGs are only suitable for printing, so that's something to keep in mind. So when you see something like this in your preview where you've got like the outline, that's okay, that means that you can cut it nice and easy. Let's go for something that is going to be a little bit trickier. Okay, let's try that one. It's going to be one of those ones now where everything I pick is going to be a cut one. Ding, 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 ding. Let's go for sublimation. Okay. So, let's say you've downloaded something and it looks like an image, because it is an image. What can you do with it? You can actually bring that in and then use your printer to print it. So, would you go about that? Rather than starting with your cutter size, we're going to go to a new document, and this time, instead of going for a cutter option, we're going to go print, and in here we've got all of our standard printer sizes. So if you go to A4, then you're going to change your colour to CMYK, because you are printing with a printer rather than with a monitor. So RGBs, when we're working with light, CMYK is when we're working with ink. And let's just put it as a generic CMYK profile. When we get into profiles, it's a little bit more tricky, so keep it nice and simple. Your DPI, you will notice, goes to 300. Now that is absolutely fine, so long as when you do your export of your cut line, you do that to 96. Okay. And then you can do your place because it's an image anyway. And cool. Let's go for a little cat, shall we? Oh, big cat. Let's zoom that out a bit. And we're going to shrink that down. I'm going to do several layers. So layers are useful where we want to group particular information. And the one that you want is this first one, second. And usually when we're doing print and cut, you're going to want 3 layers. So you have the first layer that is print, the second layer that is cut, and the third layer that is registration. So with your images, you will always drop those into your print layer. It wants to behave. Come on. There we go. So there's our cat. And you can have as many images in that layer as you want. So if you want to go back and go, okay, I want another different cat maybe. So we've got a black and white only one. We can drop that in. And you can build that up as many images as you can fit on. If you want to change something, you can go, okay, I'll replace that image, and I might replace it back to the colour cat because I want more than one colour sticker. Then when we go to cut, make sure that you have that cut layer selected, and we can click and drag over a circle. Again, I'll take that fill out and apply the stroke. And that's going to give us a sticker. And we can press and hold Alt at any time to duplicate a shape. When we let go of Alt, our snapping is going to kick back in. So it's going to tell us that our sticker shapes are level. And we can let go. So we then have 2 stickers. And to do our registration layer, so again you want to make sure that that turns blue. We are literally going to go pen and do a owl shape. When you finish doing your owl shape, if you press V on the keyboard, that's going to change back to your move arrow, and then you have your first registration mark. Now how you do your registration marks is entirely up to you. They're not automatic in Affinity, unlike if you have the Scan and Cut link with Illustrator. So it really is down to personal choice. If you want to do little squares, you can do. I find that useful for where you are doing layered vinyl, for instance. But for most print and cuts, the owl shape is absolutely fine. So basically, when you print, you hide your cut layer, like so, but always leave that registration visible. And when you export it, you're going to hide that print layer and just have that cut layer visible. And when you go to export, it will only ever export what you can see. So nice and easy. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of different files that we can use in terms of images, your cut files. The only thing I haven't really gone into is layering. So hopefully that's given you an overview of Affinity Designer. If you'd like me to do a little bit on photo too, then do so. But other than that, it's been a really quiet day today. So no questions at all. So if you do have any questions and you don't want to pop them on stream, then you can always message the page Plannercraft, or you can drop me a line too in the group, which is Scanning, Cut and Paper Craft, Courses, Classes and Workshops by Plannercraft. Longest name ever. Hope you've enjoyed that today. Affinity is currently 30% off, I believe, until the end of today. So if you want to get that, then do be quick. Again, there's also Photo and Publisher, which I'm more than happy to go into both if you have any questions. Take care for now, and I will see you tomorrow at 11 when we will be doing some crafting. Take care.